Hello, football fans, and welcome back to the fifth installment of the Doug Steele Podcast, where this week episode we are gonna go after some of the notable results from week 2, cover some not as major movement in the top 25, but there's quite the movement going on in there nonetheless, and then finish it off by telling you guys about some games to look after for week 3, as well as which conference coordinators are going to be covering what games over the course of week 3. So before I jump into that though, make sure you hit that like button, and if you're brand new to the channel, make sure you subscribe as well, as I would truly appreciate that. But let's jump right into this thing though. So first and foremost, we have the Trinity Tigers going on the road to play against the number 6 ranked Johns Hopkins Blue Jays. Now, in week 1, this would have been considered a top 10 matchup, but despite Trinity winning their game against the Guilford Quakers in week 1, they ended up falling outside of the top 25. So they were an unranked team going on the road to play against Johns Hopkins, and even though Trinity ended up losing this game, I think they deserve to be ranked in the top 25, at least at some point in the season, because they gave Johns Hopkins a really good game and nearly pulled the upset on them, even though Johns Hopkins was considered one of the better teams in this country. Next up, we had a blowout that occurred over the course of week 2, and it was the Mooresville State Mustangs hosting the McDaniel Green Terror, who were also 1-0 on the season, but they ended up blowing them out 40-9 in what turned out to be less of a contest than what it was anticipated of being in the first place. Next up, we have the Salisbury Seagulls taking on the Bethel Royals over on Poolwater T's channel. Salisbury actually did give them a little bit of a scare, but Bethel will end up going on top 28-25 in what was probably a closer game than what people would have imagined in the first place. Following that, we had now TM Sports covering the number 4 ranked Moravian Greyhounds hosting the Hamilton Continentals, who came in 0-1. They are now 0-2 on the season, as Moravian, they ended up winning 38-27, but Moravian jumped out to a big lead, and this game was simply not as close as what people would have anticipated going into the game. But Moravian it was actually not as close as what people suggested. Next up, we had the 21st ranked Concordia Moorhead Cobbers, who made their first appearance in the top 25. They went on the road to play against the Montclair State Redhawks, who won their previous game by a nice little margin, but they would end up falling to the 21st ranked team in the country, ended up losing to Concordia Moorhead 27-13 in order to keep their bid within the top 25 alive and validate their 21st ranked in the country status. Then of course we had the Juniata Eagles, who were ranked number 5 in the country after their impressive win over what was the number 1 ranked Berry Vikings in week 1. They went on the road to play against the Utica Pioneers, who were 0-1 going into this game, but Utica actually pulled off one of the more impressive upsets in this week, as they ended up beating Juniata on their home turf 31-16 in what was probably the most surprising of upsets here in this week 2 of the all-created teams Dynasty. Then we had the Amherst Mammoths, who were ranked number 2 at one point but fell out of the top 25 after their loss to Middlebury. They went on the road to play against the William Patterson Pioneers, who were ranked number 15 in the country. I was expecting Amherst to beat William Patterson since I thought they were ranked too highly, but the Pioneers must have heard my previous podcast, because they certainly made me eat my words. They ended up beating Amherst 45-28 in what was an impressive victory for the Pioneers in week 2. Then over in Big C Got Game, he was commentating the Nebraska Wesleyan Prairie Wolves playing up against the Buffalo State Bengals, who have had a hard time getting their offense going early on this season, and it continued this week as they simply did not have an answer for Nebraska Wesleyan's defensive attack. And Nebraska, they were able to find their groove early and often as they were able to pull a 33-7 victory on the road against probably one of the more lowly teams in this all-created teams dynasty. After that, we had the 25th ranked University of Wisconsin Lacrosse Eagles playing up against the Stephen Point Pointers, who were 0-1 in their own right. In the Big Pacific Conference play, it was an ugly game as Lacrosse had to kick 5 field goals, but it was just enough to overwhelm Stevens Point as they won a very close 15-13 game. Next up, the exact opposite of the Big Pacific, we had Otterbein, who did win a 24-14 game. They go on the road to play against the Tufts Jumbos, who were making their first appearance in the top 25 poll with a 24th ranking. That certainly will no longer exist because Tufts just got hit in the mouth. Not only did they lose to an unranked team at their home stadium, but Otterbein in the process sets the new record for most points scored in an all-created teams dynasty game with 70. That game was aired over on Sin with Vengeance channel if you want to go check out the full slacking. But Otterbein looked extremely impressive, and I'm sure they are going to get plenty of love in the top 25 poll when that is considered revealed later on in this podcast. But needless to say, Otterbein just absolutely destroyed Tufts, and it was a great display of offense if you happen to love offense in your football games, of course. Moving on to the Super Southeast Conference, we had West Hartford, who started off as number 1 in the country. They went on the road to play against the Birmingham Southern Panthers, who used to be ranked, but after their loss to Elmhurst, they fell out of the top 25 ranking, but they almost were able to redeem themselves by nearly beating the number 1 team in the country. West Hartford, however, does sneak away and narrowly escape the upset. They ended up winning their game 27-21 over on Royal and Poison's channel. Following that, we had the game of the week, which will be aired over on was aired on my channel last Friday as the 14th ranked Linfield Wildcats. They went on the road to play against the number 18 ranked Rochester Yellow Jackets, and just like the first game of the week that took place between Amherst and Middlebury, this was a defensive battle in its own right, but Rochester proved to be extremely dominant defensively, as the only points that Winfield was able to get was a safety, which of course had nothing to do with their defense and more about their offense not knowing where they were on the football field. But it was a nice defensive showing for the Rochester Yellow Jackets nonetheless. Then we have the Hamlin Pipers, who jumped all the way up to number 3 after their blowout victory against the Mount Union Purple Raiders, who were ranked number 9 at the time, 44-10. They went on the road this time around to play against the Pacific Boxers, who just have a rough time to start the season as they lose again, and they lost big time with a 43-8 loss to the number 3 team in the country. But Hamlin, however, is off to a fantastic start nonetheless. Definitely really encouraging if you're a Hamlin fan, because it was possible that they could have gone 0-2 when this season was in its early stages, but instead they're 2-0 and they are comfortably 2-0. So Hamlin probably one of the biggest surprises so far over the course of the season. Then we have the Hardin Simmons Cowboys, who fell out of the top 25 rankings despite their victory against DePaul University back in week 1. They went on the road to play against the Alma Scots, who replaced Harmon Simmons, with Alma now reaching the 22nd ranked team in the country. They are going to hold on to that as Alma ends up beating Harmon Simmons 25-20 at their home stadium. Speaking of teams that start with an A, the Albion Britons, who made their first appearance as the number 20 ranked team in the nation, went on the road to play against the St. Olaf O's. And while St. Olaf gave them an extremely spirited and challenging game at their home stadium, Albion does escape with a 29-25 victory and will still remain in the top 25. Up next, we have the Ursinus Bears, who are coming off a 40-16 victory against Wartburg at home. They went on the road to play against the Keene Cougars, who entered in that game 0-1. They are going to fall to 0-2 after losing to Ursinus 27-14, as Ursinus will improve to 2-0 on the young season. Up next, we had technically an upset, but we definitely called it here back in podcast number 4 if you want to go check it out. The unranked Mary Hardin Baylor Crusaders went on the road to play against the number 17 ranked UW Plattsville Pioneers, and just as expected, Mary Hardin Baylor won, and they won in big fashion, winning that game 41-14. Mary Hardin Baylor should return to the top 25, as they should have been in the top 25 the entire time, but hopefully the coaches poll will correct their own mistake from week 2. Following the Mary Hardin Baylor game, we had a later game take place between the 23rd ranked Adrian Bulldogs. They were making their first trip in the top 25 poll themselves, such as other teams that were in this created teams Dynasty. They went on the road to play against the Susquehanna Riverhawks, and Susquehanna made it interesting, but Adrian would end up winning this game 28-20 as they improved to 2-0, while Susquehanna falls to 0-2 on the young season. We also had the number 16 team in the country in the Trine Thunder host the Austin Kangaroos, and while we did expect Trine to win in this game, it was actually a little bit more challenging than expected, as the Austin Kangaroos, they came and put in a big fight. However, the Trine Thunder was just a little bit more talented at the end of the day and will end up winning this game 21-13, as they will improve to 2-0 on the season, while the Austin Kangaroos, as expected, will fall back to 0-2. We also had the Sul-Ross State Lobos go on the road to play against the now number 7th ranked team in the country and the Methodist Monarchs over on Franchise Gaming's channel if you want to go check that out. Methodist ran away with this game pretty easily, ended up winning this game 47-14 in what was an absolute blowout of Sul-Ross State, proving that they are more on that pretender side than on the contender side of things. Then we had Wartburg, who lost 40-16 against Ursinus back in week 1. They went on the road again, and this time they played against the number 2 team in the country in the North Central Cardinals, where this time around the Wartburg Knights played a lot better, and they gave North Central a massive scare. However, North Central was able to narrowly escape by the skin of their teeth with a 30-28 victory over the Wartburg Knights. If you want to catch the full game, that'll be over on TNJ's channel, who has some awesome commentary if you want to go check that out after this podcast, of course. Next up, we had the RPI Engineers go on the road to play against the Augustina Vikings, who were having their opening day. This game was extremely close. Augustania. They were down 28-20, and then they get a last-second touchdown and try to go for 2 to tie the game up, but they fail to get the 2-point conversion, and with 10 seconds left, they just were not able to get the ball back before the game was over. So RPI pulls away with a narrow victory. Was going to be on Gridiron Games channel, but unfortunately, of course, the game files for that got corrupted, which is extremely unfortunate because it was an extremely entertaining game to watch. Finally, to round things out, the Iowa Wesleyan Tigers were on the road to play against the Bates Bobcats, and not sure what's going on here, why it's not showing a score, but Bates did end up winning that game against Iowa Wesleyan. Don't remember the score off the top of my head, but the coach, aka Coach Plays Game, has that game over on his channel if you want to go check that out for yourself. Moving on to the coaches poll for week 3, and there's not a lot of movement this time around in terms of teams that were coming out of the top 25 to coming into the top 25, but obviously the biggest riser of the week has to be the Otterbein Cardinals. They went from being an unranked squad just a week ago to now being considered the #1 team in the country, which is astonishing considering you never see that in college football, but it's just been absolutely wild over the past couple of days. Of course, Tufts, no surprise, is out of the rankings after their blowout loss to Otterbein. And then the biggest fall in terms of teams that are still in the top 25 has to be John Hopkins, despite going 2-0, barely win against Trinity, Texas, home of the Tigers, and so they'll fall from, I believe it was number 6. Yes, number 6 in the country, and they are now number 11 in this week's installment of the top 25. Alright, so now that we went through what happened over the course of week 2, as well as some of the movement that occurred within the top 25 coaches poll, let's take a look at some notable games to watch for week 3. So, first and foremost, we have the number 5 team in the nation, and the Moravian Greyhounds go on the road to play against the Wheaton Thunder, who are 0-1 since they were on bye over the course of week 2, and then took a big loss at home against John Hopkins earlier this season during the course of week 1. This game will be over on TNJ's channel later on this week, so make sure you check them out in the description if you're interested in some Moravian versus Wheaton football. Next up, we have the number 8 team in the country, the North Central Cardinals, going on the road against the Milliken Big Blue, who are currently 0-2 on the season and probably will be 0-3 since the Big Blue are simply outmatched against this North Central Cardinals football team. Probably won't be too much of a contest when it's all said and done. Up next, we had the number 22 ranked in the country in the Alma Scots going on the road to play against the Rowan Profs, who are 0-2 on the season. Having a hard time getting a read on Alma, who even though they are 2-0 thus far, they are having a little bit difficult of a time with the teams they play against, who aren't too terribly impressive. So it'll be interesting to see how they play against Rowan, even though they are currently 0-2 on the young season. Then we have the 1-1 Salra State Lobos, who are coming off a blowout loss against the Methodist Monarchs. They are going to be on the road once again, this time to play against the number 16 Albion Britons. And when we tell you Salra State needs to play a lot better if they want to have a chance in this one, if they play like they did against Methodist, this game will be over pretty quickly, as Albion is not a team to be messed with thus far in the young season. This game will be over on the coach's channel later this week if you want to go and check that out for yourself. Then we have the game of the week, where the new number 1 team in the country in the Otterbein Cardinals, following their 70-7 victory over Tufts University, they go on the road to play against the number 20 team in the Adrian Bulldogs, who are also 2-0 in their own right. We're gonna find out a lot between both of these squads, as we find out if Adrian is for real or not, and then as well as find out what we have in Otterbein. If that 70-7 victory, is that just a flash in the pan, or is this a team that really needs to be considered a potential contender to win the national championship later on in the season? But this game will be the game of the week for week 3, and that will be over on my channel this Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So make sure you check in and see what happens between these two obviously talented football teams later on this week. Then we have an additional top 25 matchup with the Hendricks Warriors coming from not being ranked over the course of week 2 to now being ranked number 9 in the country following 2 impressive wins to start off the season. They go on the road to play against an impressive team in their own right in the 14th ranked Morris State Mustangs, who are coming off a 40-9 win off of the McDaniel Green Thunder. This game will be hosted by Royal and Poison for this week, so make sure you check that out, as I'm sure that is going to be a very interesting game to watch when it is all said and done. Following that game, we have the 2-0 West Hartford Bantams, who fall down to number 7 in the country after nearly being upset last week by the Birmingham Southern College Panthers. Only narrowly escaped by a single possession last time out. They go on the road again to play against Pacific Lutheran Lutz, who are an average team, so West Hartford shouldn't have too much trouble with them, but you never know in this beautiful thing called college football. This game will be hosted by Big C Got Game later on this week. Then we have the McMurray Warhawks, who are making their first appearance in the top 25 poll, ranked number 18 in the country. They go on the road to play against the Carleton Knights, who are currently 1-1, which could be interesting since McMurray is a recently ranked team and Carleton is not bad themselves, so it'll be interesting to see how that game turns out later on this week. Up next, we have the Southern Virginia Knights, who are 1-1 on the young season. They go on the road and get a huge test against the William Patterson Pioneers, who are now up to number 4 in the country after an impressive win against Amherst, who at one point was ranked all the way up to number 2 in the country. This game will be over on Poolwater T's channel later on this week. Conference coordinators playlist will be down in the description for your enjoyment down below. Speaking of potentially enjoyable games, we have the Rochester Yellow Jackets, who nearly fell out of the top 25 after losing their starting quarterback. They are now down to 24th in the country. They'll play against the Willamette Bearcats, who looked good in week 2 but not so much in week 1, so it'll be interesting to see where Willamette is, which team shows up, because if they played like they did in their victory instead of in their defeat, then they could potentially pull off the upset against Rochester, who is without their starting quarterback. Up next, we have the number 10 ranked Nebraska Wesleyan Prairie Wolves, who are currently 2-0 on the season. They play against the St. Olaf Owls, who gave Albion a pretty interesting game last week, but Nebraska Wesleyan is a little bit better, so I'm pretty sure that Nebraska Wesleyan should be able to win this game and therefore move on up to 3-0 on the season. Next up, we have the George Fox Bruins going on the road to play against the Hamlin Pipers, who still remain at number 3 in the country thanks to their big win against none other than the Pacific Boxers. So Hamlin probably, they're looking extremely good so far this season, and they probably very much will go 3-0, no questions asked. George Fox is a little bit better than the Pacific Boxers, but I don't think they're as good as the Mount Union Purple Raiders, although I don't know how much that will matter, given that they've blown out both Mount Union and not to mention Pacific last week. So this will probably be another blowout, but in case it is really close, this game will be over on Octagonal's channel later on this week, as he will be covering this game for the sake of the Big Pacific Conference. Up next, we have the Buffalo State Bengals, fresh off a pretty tough loss against the Nebraska Wesleyan Prairie Wolves. They will now have to host the Methodist Monarchs, who are very much even better than the Nebraska Prairie Wolves. At least that is what the coaches poll was saying, as Methodist coming into this game ranked number 2 in the country. This game will probably be a blowout, and Buffalo State will fall to 0-3, but Craniac Gaming will be streaming the game over on his channel later on this week. Speaking of potential blowouts, we have Johns Hopkins. Despite starting 2-0 of the season, they are now down to the 11th ranked team in the country. They got to go on the road to play against the Christopher Newport Captains. They're probably going to remember that the coaches poll dropped them, and they're going to be playing with some anger most likely and take it out on the Christopher Newport Captains. Up next, we have the Concordia Moorhead Cobbers, who moved up to number 19 in the country after their victory against the one and only Montclair State Riverhawks, who were 1-0 before Concordia Moorhead changed that. They play against St. John Fisher, who is also 2-0 in their own right. However, they currently don't have a top 25 ranking. Winner of this game will, of course, they should be a top 20 team regardless. Granted, I'm surprised St. John Fisher doesn't have a top 25 ranking to begin with. So we'll see if St. John Fisher can prove that they deserve to be ranked in the top 25, or if that 2-0 record represents cupcake victories. Then we have the Bates Bobcats, which actually had a narrow victory over Iowa Wesleyan. I just checked shortly after recording the week 2 recap. They won 39 to, I believe, 36. But the number 6 ranked team in the country in the Bates Bobcats, they go on the road to play against Technical College of New Jersey Lions, who are in the top 25 for the first time with a 25 rank. So that game will be over on TM Sports channel later on this week if you want to go and check out that game. Next, we have the Central Colonials, who at one point were ranked up number 3 in the country, but ever since that loss against North Central, they simply have not found their groove, and now they are in danger of falling to 0-3 on the young season, as they have to play another tough team in the Bethel Royals, who are currently ranked number 15 in the country. And even worse, Central has to go on the road and play Bethel, not the other way around. So this could be a tough game for Central, given the poor start that they have had so far this year. Up next, we have the 2-0 RPI Engineers, who are ranked number 12 in the country. They do fall slightly since Augustania. They nearly pull the upset off on RPI, just being a 2-point conversion short of pulling the game into overtime and potentially winning it in OT. They play against a team not as good as Augustania and the Sewanee Tigers, who are currently 0-2 on the season. Gridiron Games will be hosting this broadcast over on his YouTube channel, so make sure to check that out later on this week. Then we have the Texas Lutheran Bulldogs, who are only 0-1, but it could be 0-2 given that they have to go on the road to play against the Mary Hardin Baylor Crusaders, who are 2-0, and they finally have a ranking that they deserve. Or at least they are ranked, but they're only ranked number 17, but they look to improve on that ranking, trying to go 3-0 against the Texas Lutheran Bulldogs. Franchise Gaming will be hosting this game over on his channel and his coverage of the Big Southwest Conference. Finally, the last game that should be pretty interesting to watch is the 23rd ranked Howard Payne Yellow Jackets going on the road to play against the Wilmington Quakers. Wilmington, they may be 0-2, but they did give Mount Union a scare, jumping to a 14-0 lead before losing to Mount Union 28-14. And Mount Union was ranked number 9 in the country, but they still have some work to do in order to be ranked in the top 25. Wilmington could make this an interesting game, though. They do have what it takes to be competitive, but can they take the next step and start pulling upsets? Because if they don't pull the upset on Howard Payne, Wilmington is going to fall to 0-3 on the young season. Sin with Vengeance will be covering the game over on his channel later on this week for his coverage of the Big North Conference. Alright, so that's all I have for today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to the 5th installment of the Doug Steele Podcast. If you enjoy the content, make sure you leave a like, and if you're brand new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button as well, as I would truly appreciate that. Until then, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a wonderful day today. Take care.